Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a step back in time. We're going to move away from the grand political maneuvering of pharaohs and focus instead on reconstructing a profound human world. We're looking at an everyday existential struggle that literally defined an entire civilization. You see, for the ancient Egyptians, mortality was absolutely not just a quiet fade to black. It was the beginning of an incredibly dangerous journey. It was a fight for sheer survival against the ultimate, absolute oblivion. Okay, let's dive into this. Because the answer to that question for an ancient Egyptian was, quite frankly, utterly terrifying. They deeply believed in a concept known as the second death. Basically, if you didn't properly prepare for your passing, you didn't just go to a bad place. No, it was much worse. You were permanently erased from all planes of existence. The everyday lives of these people, their fears, their hopes, their immense civilizational efforts, they were all driven by this primal anxiety of avoiding such a horrifying fate. So to avoid this complete and irreversible spiritual annihilation, the ancient Egyptians engineered an incredibly elaborate, high-stakes survival strategy. They completely transformed death from what we might casually consider a final rest into a highly active, totally perilous transition. You literally had to work to survive death. Every single tomb built, every spell inscribed, every linen bandage carefully wrapped. It was all a calculated technological and spiritual effort to secure eternal life and a paradise they called the Field of Reeds. Section 1. The Anatomy of the Soul, Engineering Eternity. To really understand their ultimate survival strategy, we first have to grasp how they viewed human consciousness. It was fundamentally different from how we think today, and it set the groundwork for absolutely everything they did after a person took their last breath. Think about our modern, often Western expectation of a single, unified soul, just one essence that leaves the body upon death. The ancient Egyptian worldview? Completely different. They believed in a highly complex, modular soul. They saw human consciousness as a cluster of distinct spiritual components. And the truly terrifying part? When you died, this cluster shattered. So their survival strategy demanded meticulously reassembling all of these scattered parts after death. So how did these components actually function? Well, there were 5 essential parts. The Ka was your vital life force, your spiritual double, and it actually needed physical food offerings to survive. I mean, if it didn't eat, it starved. Then there's the Ba, your personality, which was often depicted as a human-headed bird that needed the absolute freedom to fly between worlds. The Ren was your identity or your name, and the Shut was your protective shadow. Now, if you successfully reunited all of these, they formed the Ach, which was the glorified, immortal spirit. But, and this is a huge but, none of this spiritual machinery worked without the ultimate anchor, and that was the Khat, the physical body itself. Section 2. The mummification process, a 70-day survival strategy. This brings us right to the visceral, physical labor required to preserve that bodily anchor. You know, mummification really wasn't some macabre, morbid obsession. It was actually an act of profound love, duty, and sheer spiritual engineering. It was a 70-day race against decay just to ensure the soul had a home to return to. We have this amazing account from the Greek historian Herodotus that brilliantly captures the sensory reality of the embalming tent. Just imagine the heavy, pungent scent of cedar oil, pure myrrh, cassia, and palm wine, all desperately mixing with the harsh reality of a decaying human body. Highly specialized priests worked as embalmers, carrying out this physically exhausting and incredibly skilled trade to purify and preserve their loved ones. The actual chemistry of this survival strategy relied heavily on something called natron. This was a naturally occurring white crystalline mineral salt, usually collected from dry lake beds like the Wadi Natrun. The embalmers would meticulously pack the body inside and out with this salt and leave it on a slanted bed for 40 grueling days. It acted as a massively powerful drying agent, completely draining all the bodily fluids and literally stopping decay in its tracks. Let's walk through the precise steps of how they did this. First came excerebration. They take a long metal hook, push it up the nostril, and physically scrape out and liquefy the brain. They actually thought the brain was useless, so they just discarded it. Next, they removed the lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines, cleansed them, and placed them into specific canopic jars, which were magically guarded by the 4 sons of Horus. After those 40 days of natron dehydration we just talked about, came the wrapping. But hold on, here is a crucial detail I really want you to remember for later. The heart, the ib, was purposely left inside the chest cavity. The Egyptians firmly believed the heart, not the brain, was the true seat of human thought and emotion. Keep that in mind because it's going to become incredibly important. Section 3. magic, amulets, and servants, equipping the dead. Now we shift from physical preservation to magical armoring. The actual wrapping of the body in resin-soaked linen took roughly 15 days. This process turned the corpse into a magically fortified vessel because they would embed critical survival tools directly into the layers of linen. Now remember that heart left inside the chest? One of the most vital survival tools they had was placed right over it, the heart scarab. This was a heavy, substantial amulet, usually carved from faience or stone, and it was inscribed with a very specific, desperate spell. You see, the ancient Egyptians knew human beings were flawed. They were utterly terrified that their own heart would snitch on them for their earthly sins during the final judgment. So this amulet was literally a magical hack. It was designed to silence the organ with a direct command. Do not stand as a witness against me. And it gets even more fascinating when you think about the deep social and economic anxieties of the time. The afterlife wasn't just resting peacefully on a cloud. You were fully expected to perform hard manual labor in the field of reeds. We're talking digging canals, carrying heavy sand, real agricultural work. So, to get out of this, wealthy Egyptians mass-produced these miniature magical servants called ushabti figures. Some tombs contained exactly 401 of them. That's one for every single day of the year, plus 36 overseers to keep them in line. The idea was that when the deceased was called upon to work by the gods, the spell on these figures would activate, and the ushabti would step up and say, "Here I am, I will do it for you." Section 4. Awakening the Dead, the Final Ritual. So, after 70 days, the body is beautifully preserved and heavily armored. The family is mourning, the incense is burning, but right now, there's immense tension at the tomb entrance. The mummy is ready, sure, but it is currently a completely blind, deaf, and mute object. Without one final, absolutely critical step, the soul will never be able to use it, which triggers that dreaded second death. This brings us to the opening of the mouth ceremony. A Sem priest, wearing this incredibly striking leopard skin, steps forward to perform what is essentially a magical reboot. He uses a special fishtail-shaped tool called a pesheshketh. Interestingly enough, this tool was originally used in everyday life to cut infants' umbilical cords, so it perfectly symbolizes a new birth. The priest touches the mummy's eyes, nose, ears, and mouth with it. This action symbolically restores the deceased's ability to breathe, to see, to speak, and crucially, to eat those essential food offerings. Finally, the body is a living home for the soul again. Section 5. Navigating the Underworld, the Duat. Having a functional, magical body is only half the battle. Now the soul has to plunge into absolute psychological terror. This was not a peaceful transition at all. It was a dark, perilous realm that had to be actively, desperately survived. This realm was called the Duat. Just imagine the existential anxiety of having to face this environment in the pitch black. The Duat was packed with cavernous obstacles, horrifying guardian demons, and even sentient doorways that literally demanded you speak their secret, obscure names before they'd ever let you pass. If you made a single mistake, you couldn't move forward. If you were delayed too long trying to figure it out, your ka might starve to death. The stakes couldn't have been higher. So, to navigate this nightmare, they relied on what we commonly call the Book of the Dead, but we really need to reframe how we view this object. It wasn't just a religious textbook you casually read. It was a desperately needed survival manual, highly customized and personalized for the specific person who died. Its actual ancient Egyptian name translates much more accurately to the Book of Going Forth by Day. It contained over 200 distinct spells that provided the exact passwords you needed, the precise right answers to the gods' trick questions, and literal instructions on how to avoid being eaten by underworld snakes or giant crocodiles. Which brings our recurring thread of the heart to its absolute climax. After somehow surviving the horrors of the Duat, the deceased finally faced the ultimate test. They stood before Osiris and a terrifying panel of 42 judging deities. The actual physical heart, the ab, that was purposefully left inside the mummy, was placed on a cosmic scale. It was weighed directly against the feather of Ma'at, which represented universal truth and justice. The god Thoth stood by, pen in hand, to record the final result. Now, if the heart was heavy with a lifetime of unconfessed sin, and the magic of that heart scrab failed to silence it, a horrifying hybrid hippopotamus-lion-crocodile monster called Ammit would lunge forward and devour the heavy heart right then and there. If that happened, the soul was instantly and permanently erased from the cosmos. The second death was complete.
The ancient Egyptians built a staggering, almost incomprehensible civilizational architecture entirely just to survive their own mortality. They harnessed chemistry, they leveraged magic, and they mobilized grueling physical labor, all to ensure they wouldn't be forgotten by the cosmos. It's a massive human effort, and it leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. When we look at our own modern, highly sanitized funerary practices today, well, how do they reflect our deepest unspoken societal anxieties about eternity? What modern survival strategies are we subtly employing right now to ensure that we too aren't erased? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope it leaves you with a profound new perspective on history, mortality, and the human condition.